lot going on in this building.
Okay. I'll do a throw to camera. There. Okay. Hi. Welcome to another Dawncast podcast. And tonight I'm just so thrilled to have Bart Bailey, who actually we met on LinkedIn. So we connected on LinkedIn via, through our work in the diversity and inclusion space. And Bart happened to be in Australia this week. And as we were talking about, the whole diversity and inclusion piece, I said, look, please can you share with us on your work, what you do, all of that's here. So I dragged Bart from in the city of centre of Sydney out here into our studio in Blacktown, and with his lovely wife Janine, who's and they're still getting used to the time zone in Australia here, and it's 5 a.m. in the United States. So thank you very much for staying up and to speak with us.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Dar.
Yeah. So, Bart, look, we were discussing the other day. I mean, you're here to run a workshop on unconscious bias. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And we were talking about how what it was like, what it is like in the United States in terms of the whole subject around diversity and inclusion, because you have more of a race based kind of issue around inclusion. Is that right?
So that's a piece of it, right? There's a piece in terms of race, but then there's just the diversity of thought as well, right? And especially the work I do can be either in police departments, it could be with Fortune 500 organizations or nonprofits. And so part of that is just having an open dialogue around whatever your organization is and how was it formed. And if most of my focus and most of the conversations are in Fortune 500 organizations, and if historically they've been one particular dominant culture, then you do get into race. But you also have different conversations around people who are who've been there for some time, and now we have millennials coming in. And so how do they have conversations and see each other's humanity and problem solve and grow the business? So it's race, but then there's other things too. There's gender and LGBTQ. I mean, there's a whole lot that comes up. Yeah.
And how did you get onto that journey and to get to do this work in this space?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. And I don't think we even talked about that.
No, we didn't.
So
we thought we'd save it for today.
So it's kind of funny, actually. I mean, it's not funny. It's but I got into this work after working in corporate America for 25 years. And all of that work was in operations as a supervisor, regional director and that kind of work, and people reporting to me. I was not a facilitator or anything like that. But what happened, probably about 4 years ago now, our youngest son was in middle school and was bullied. And as a result of him being bullied, there were 5 kids. There was a whole bunch going on, but I asked the principal to take care of it. The principal did a great job dealing with the bullying situation, but there were 5 kids, and it was going on for 3 months. And out of that, with the work that the principal did, I went in and did some work with the principal and the teachers and the office staff. There were about 70 of them. Did a 90-minute thing around unconscious bias because they didn't see this little brown kid walking around in the school. And with some of the things that were occurring with him, teachers should have seen that prior to me finding out 3 months later, right? And so...
And he was bullied by the same kids, the same background as him in terms of...
No.
White.
So a couple of things. Our son is a smaller guy. He's just a small person. In size because he was born with a heart defect, and so, but he wears glasses, and he's one of few African Americans in the school system that we live in. It's probably less than 5% African Americans in the school system, and so they were bullying him. It could be racial, ethnic. It could be the fact that he wears glasses, the fact that he's a little smaller than some of the other kids, and so there were a couple things that came up in terms of the bullying. The bullying was one piece, right? And we managed through that, and he's good. But the other part of it was the adults who were there, and they went into this profession not only to teach students, but also to pour into them, right? And so how can you not see that one of the students is dealing with something, right? And so we want our teachers to be more aware and conscious of the whole being, right? Not don't just teach me 1+1 =2, but what's happening with me as I'm sitting in your classroom. So the situation, I went in and did a 90-minute session around unconscious bias with them. The organization that I work for, the founder kind of heard about that I did this work, and I went down and I was doing some training. Actually, I went through some training with the organization. It was a company I was working for at the time. Went down there, went through the organization I'm with now, went through their training around unconscious bias, and just fell in love with the work, right? And so that's the primary focus that I'm doing now. A lot of it is unconscious bias, but we also do leadership and some other stuff. And I'm also a professor at a college in Massachusetts as well. So, but I teach this one class around leadership and use of self as well. So that kind of, I would say, for the last 3 years has shifted. So no more that 25 years of corporate America managing people, now really holding the container to have generative dialogue around our blind spots, right? How do we honor who we are and then be more conscious about the fact that we're tribal people, right? And how that benefits us and in some ways hinders our ability to connect with people.
And how did that, did it resolve for your son? Did the teachers, did the school really looked and or embraced, take on board the unconscious bias training that you provided?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. Just like any other training, so I'll segue and then I'll answer your question. The interesting thing, in the States, people go, to get a driver's license, you have to take a driving class, right? And so they say the most safest people are, I think it's 3 to 6 months after you've gotten your license. So you're very safe. You're staying at 55 miles an hour. You're paying attention to how you turn, 2 hands on the driving wheel, all of that. Well, after that time period, after that sweet spot, after the honeymoon, we tend to be the worst drivers.
Right.
Because now I've driven for a little while, and I'm just going to do what I want to do. So I'll say this, after the session, people were more conscious, but it's just like any other training, any other training. It's about personal responsibility. How accountable do I want to hold myself? And if you really want to open up unconscious bias is really, let's have a conversation about who you are as a being, where you've learned that from, and are you willing to challenge some of that stuff? So some of the teachers really gravitated towards it, and some, it was a nice little 90-minute thing, right?
Pep talk.
Pep talk, right? And then outside of that, the principal is still trying to come back with some of that social emotional learning. And so if the school really takes that on, then that gives it the foundation and framework where you can marry up unconscious bias work with social emotional learning. If you don't do that, then it was 90 minutes that was spent, that if you took it on for yourself, then you're doing something. If you didn't, it was 90 minutes, right? So you need some foundational stuff, which is the social emotional learning, that would help support the training that I did with them.
When we talk about unconscious bias, and I think you and I discussed this the other day, is that we all have our biases.
Yeah.
And in the unconscious bias training, it is bringing us or human beings to be aware of those biases, right, and to do something about it.
Right.
But do you think, you've done a lot of that work. Yeah. Does it really work?
Yeah. A great question. So for me, I'll answer myself, and then I'll share with you in terms of when I'm holding the space with our clients and our partners. So for me personally, I sat through the session, right? So for me, I became more conscious about, there are certain people that I like to be around, period, right? We go on vacation, there's probably 12 of us that go on vacation. We rent out a villa or we rent out some suites and we're all together. There are certain types of people that I invite to my house, and those are typically the people I like. And that's the way it's been for 50 years. I turned 50 years old this year.
Oh.
Right? And so, but what I also got out of that session was that those people that I like to be with, I love them, but I also know that I am isolating myself from others, right? And so when I'm flying and I get on a plane and I sit next to someone that I don't know, and if I don't fall asleep, which I probably will going back, but if I don't fall asleep because I travel a lot, I may have a conversation with someone who I see as other, but typically we'll have a conversation with this person and we start to connect. So I'm the type of person that has learned a little late in life that these barriers that I don't intentionally put up are barriers that are hindering my own personal growth as a human being, right? So, unconscious bias. Does the training work? The training works as much as the person is willing to grow. Period. So if I come into a session, whether it's a full day or 3 day or a week or whatever it is, and I already believe that I'm the perfect human being that has ever been created, and I go through this session, I have this, cathartic moment, I have whatever I have. But at the end of the day, you know what? I was perfect before I came in there. I like the way I was before, and I'm going to stay that way. Then that's what it's going to be. But if I go through the session and I actually write down some things, wow, this was an aha moment. Wow, here's something I need to do differently. And I consciously choose to do something because this is difficult. It's sort of like it's way beyond the New Year's resolution, right? So many of us say January, I got a New Year's resolution. Yeah. Well, this is deeper than that because I need to change the way I've seen the world for 50 years, 25 years, 30 years, and say, how can I challenge that for myself? I don't want somebody else to challenge that. I'm challenging myself on the way I see the world. That's hard for a lot of people. Most of us are uncomfortable with fear, right? We're uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. And very few of us are going to say, you know what? I want to make myself uncomfortable.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So,
And the thing is, you're saying to be conscious.
right.
I mean, the unconscious bias. How can you be conscious of those unconscious bias?
Yeah.
It's working a lot on the self.
Yes.
I mean, our hashtag is the difference is you, because I think at the end of the day, no matter how many hours of training you put yourself through, but as you said, it's about getting to the point of understanding that you have the control over it. But when do you think you got to that stage of realizing there's actually me?
Yeah. So I'm gonna add a couple more things about the situation with our son. One was the fact that I went to the training with the company that I'm with. Outside of that, I was never bullied, right? And so that experience with my son took me to a place that I had to really understand. So I took an 8-week MBSR course, 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And I think the combination of going through the training around unconscious bias, going through this 8 weeks of mindfulness-based stress reduction, which was all about meditation, right? And so it's 8 weeks of meditating, 8 weeks of understanding my own personal triggers. That session was a lot more deeper than I thought. And it took me to a place where I had to challenge myself and challenge the way I see the world. Because quite frankly, me growing up, if somebody were to bully me, the way I was raised was, I'm going to handle that, right? Yeah. And so we don't raise our son to be that way. So we want him to be more of a connector with human beings versus going right to the battle. So it forced me to really look at.
And what did you find? Can you share some of those moments? Is it possible?
Yeah. So I will share that, just a simple thing, right? And this isn't all that deep, but the simple thing was, and I do this in some of my sessions, at the end of one of the weeks, the person said, I want you to be more conscious of everything you put in your mouth, everything you eat. Don't just throw it in there, and consume it. And I don't know if you can really see, but I consume a lot. But they said, I want you to actually think about where it came from, right? And so in that same session, they gave us raisins. And so the first raisin you eat, the second reason they asked you to think about the 5 senses. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? Does it sound like anything if you squeeze it? the five senses. And then the last one, and I do this in some of the sessions, they said, okay, I want you to imagine, just hold this raisin in your hand, a small raisin. At one point, this was a grape, right? It was on a vine, taking in sun. But then some human being went out there and picked this grape for you. And then they took it, this basket, put it in a basket. They took it up to this place so it could be dehydrated. That may be a second person, second human being that has carried this grape for you. And then this grape now was put into a nice little package and then put on a truck. And that truck was probably somewhere in California, and that's the west coast of the United States, and I live on the east coast. And now this truck, this is the third person bringing this raisin to you, has crossed the country to bring this raisin to a grocery store. And then someone went into the grocery store and purchased it. And that person brought it to this session that we were doing. And so they went there and mapped out that each one of these people were touching and caring for this one raisin in this box of 100 for you, to support their family, to support their hopes and dreams, so that you can simply throw it in your mouth and consume it. And so I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, wow, that's a raisin. I just want to eat it. I don't want to think about all of that.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a long journey.
It's a long journey. And each hand that touched it was trying to care for it in a way that's gentle and nourishing for me, so that they could support their family. And so what they challenged us to do was to look at that one thing in terms of a raisin, but think about everything else that you consume in the process that it got in front of you. And then ultimately what happened with me was thinking about how I engage with people at work. And when I was a manager or a supervisor, how did this person get in front of me? What was their journey? Who cared for them, right? And do I even know their story enough so that I manage them the way that they want to be treated versus, the golden rule, treating people the way that you want to be treated, which is not necessarily the best rule. And so if I get to know this person and I treat them the way they want to be treated, then that's more of the platinum rule. And that's more engaging in some way so that they may come and bring their whole self to work, because we're always talking about we want to empower people. Well, I can't empower you if I don't know you. If I don't know your journey from whatever to get to work in front or with me, then I'm missing out on the opportunity, right? And I think that was the key during that 8-week MBSR course that really clicked for me, right? We're talking about a raisin, but what about human beings?
Yep. I mean, as you said, so it allows you to see and understand the relationship that you have with your the people that you work with. But as you were sharing, I'm thinking, I wonder how would leaders in organizations overall, big organizations, will they have time to do that?
I love it.
And they're thinking, hang on, I've got, revenue to kind of, make here. I've got products to push out, and I've got to come up with solutions. So where do you have time to have that kind of stop to think?
I love that, right? So that question comes up a lot when I start sharing my journey and story. And so I say, I don't know. You'll have a leader, CEO, VP of an organization says, hey, Bart, I don't know if I have that time. They'll say the barrier to what you want me to do is time.
Yeah.
And then so I say, well, how do you overcome that barrier? And then they got to figure it out. But outside of that, what I'll say to them is this. What I also don't know is what's the cost and the price of you not making the time, right? Can you quantify the cost of you not spending 5 minutes, because it really doesn't take a whole lot to spend 5 minutes with someone, right? To find out who they are besides Bart Bailey. Who are you? Why is your name Bart? What's your middle name? Who named you? Why is that your middle name? What is your last name? Why is that your last name? If you care to share. And then I know more than just Bart Bailey, right? And so, again, it's about what's the price not to. So some organizations, if you do the research around Polaroid went out of business because it had the instant, you hit the button and right, the
Yeah.
little thing comes out. Well, their employees told them about digital cameras. So what was the cost or the price of them not connecting with their employees or not understanding or listening? So I don't know, but I do know that there is a cost and a price of not engaging. And I would say that most leaders need to understand what that is. And if they're willing to absorb that cost to say, you're just a number, let's get this widget out the door, then do that. But understand the life cycle for most businesses now, with the internet and the fast pace of everything, the life cycles are changing. And I would think, if you want to be sustainable, you have to create an environment that truly inspires your employees for innovation. And treating me like a number is not going to lead towards innovation, right?
Your work in this space, was that more, or did you move deeply into that after your son's experience, or did you have some interest and passion around that whole inclusion piece prior to the experience with your son at school?
So I would say that I had some interest in inclusion because I've had awesome mentors, all nationalities. But the one who I talk about a lot doesn't look like me. He's a white male. He's deceased now. His name was Bob Haluki, and he spent 18 months showing me the electric utility industry. Right, picked me up every morning at work, and so that experience with him helped me open my eyes to say, you know what, every mentor doesn't have to look like me. And I don't have to, my mentees don't all have to look like me. So I had some interest, but I would say the experience with my son really triggered something deeper, right? Because it forced me to see how young people are seeing each other. He was, he's 15 now, so he was about 12, right? And so how is it that 12-year-olds can't see the humanity in each other? Right. And so it made me really look at some things about myself. Right. And so we also do some work, and our family does, I would say, some work with 2 children's hospitals. Right. Because of the experience of our son being born, he was there for the first 3 months of his life. He was at a children's hospital. And we have a great connection with the hospital where he was born. We were there pretty much every day. There was a snowstorm. We went and picked up a nurse to bring them in, right? And so because they became part of our family. But we also know that some physicians and people in healthcare don't see the humanity in people, even though that's their position, right? Certain doctors will see obese patients as a certain way, and they treat people a certain way. So we volunteer with 2 children's hospitals to help healthcare professionals understand what it means to provide compassionate care for the patient and family. So we continue. This is, actually my son, the young guy, my wife and I, we continue to pour into that space too.
And in the community that you live in,
Yeah.
is this diverse? Is it culturally diverse?
Yes.
Oh, there's a bit of a hesitation there.
Because I got to think.
Because if the hospital, if you're trying, I'm hearing about how some people don't treat others, the way that they see them as obese, and that's the way that there's no compassion or humanity around it. So I'm wondering, what is that? What is the community like?
So where we live is in Macungie, Pennsylvania, which is outside of Allentown, Pennsylvania. Allentown itself, the city, is very diverse, right? And it's just like anything else. So once you go into the suburbs, it's a little less, right? And even like the streets we live on, there are African Americans, but you see people maybe jogging or walking a dog, but there's nobody that's one of the close houses, right? And so, and actually, I don't think we're going to have a chance to do it this year, but we plan to have what we call a dinner on the street,
Oh, wow.
right?
Yep.
And so I'm going to go to the town, block off some section, and say, everybody bring out some chairs, tables. We're eating outside,
Mm,
and we're going to get to know each other,
mm.
right? And so, is it diverse? It probably is more diverse than I think, because it's just the lens that I see, right? And so in my lens, I would say it's really not that diverse. But once I get to talk to people, and once we get to do this little event, dinner in the street, or if you want to include Allentown, the city, then yeah, the area is very, very diverse. So yeah.
Well, I'd love to hear the result of that dinner in the street. But tell me about growing up. I mean, like, give us a bit about who Bart, become this corporate the last 25 years. You know, was that expected of you to become a corporate person and
Oh,
by your parents?
yeah. So wow, you would need Dorothy and Lionel to sit here and tell you,
Oh,
but I'll give you what I think their perspective was. It was so both of my parents were heavily involved in civil rights. Um, so as a young kid, you're talking about a 5, 6, 7 year old. I knew that I wasn't going to be somebody that sits in the back of the bus. Okay, so if you've ever heard of Black Power and all that kind of stuff, my
yes,
parents were all into all of that.
right.
So, um, there was a sense of identity that it was clear to me at a young age of who I am and loving myself.
Mm,
So very little of me being impacted or my spirit being crushed by external forces.
right.
My wife will tell you today, I'm one that I don't hesitate to tell you that I love myself. It's a
Yeah.
little, she says it's a bit much actually. Um,
Well,
so,
one of the interviewees said to us, he goes, you need to look in the mirror and say, I love myself. I love myself. I love myself.
yeah, I think I probably said that too much as a child. I don't even need to say it no more. So you have that, right? And so they poured into me, and I think there was a sense that I don't know what they really thought I was going to do. But in high school, it was athletics. So I did a lot there. I ran track and actually did well. And so track paid for college. So I went to college on a scholarship. And so I think the biggest piece was thank goodness he's on a scholarship, right? So I think that was the bigger piece, that he's going to college, and I don't think it was a question, but they didn't have to finance it, right? And so once I got into college, my parents just kind of were like, wow, because that's where I really came into my own. High school, middle school to I would say 10th grade, I really wasn't that focused.
Mm,
11th grade, once track started, really, I could see that I had an opportunity. I had some awesome coaches. With the Rothenbergs, and then Fletcher James, and some other people that really said, you know what, you need to pay attention to the books. You're doing well on the competing, but now it's time to pick up these books so that you can go to any school you want to. And so the doors opened up. Once I got into college, I really focused. And it's funny because we still connect with some of my college friends, and they'll say, Bart, he wouldn't study with anybody else because he wanted to mess up the curve, right? Because you have the curve. He wanted to be the A, and everybody else is below, and that wasn't necessarily true. But I did focus once I got to college, and I don't think there was a question about what I was going to do, because they knew that I was going to do something, and so business degree, and then went into to business. Yeah.
So obviously, it sounds like your childhood was very much influenced, or you got the confidence to believe in yourself from your parents' activities around civil rights.
Yeah, and so both were active in civil rights, and both I could see, and just people we were around. Similarly, our kids probably we typically take vacation with family, and so the kids will be with the family too, and they can see that all of these adults are successful in what they do. And so similarly, my parents, it would be family, and then we call extended family, which are my mother's friends and my father's friends, that were people who were successful, but not just successful, but people who were positive about their identity, right? And so that confidence
And
all of that was just there.
yeah, one of the things that I think what we try to do through Dawn, our Dawn network, is to increase the visibility of those role models here in Australia, because I don't believe that people see enough of the diversity of faces and talent in especially in senior roles, be it in business, be it in politics, be it in corporate. So I guess I suppose for you, you actually have had role models that you could look up to, and that's why who you are. But would you say that for the African Americans, a lot of them, I mean, not necessarily have the same advantage as you have and privilege to be able to be exposed to that kind of class, if I could put it that way?
I would say to a degree, right? And so it depends on where. Oh my goodness, there's so many layers to what you just asked me. So, but I would say to a degree, it depends on where someone grew up, right? So I grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, right? And so that is the highest per capita income for African Americans in the world.
Wow.
Okay. So
they would call you privileged.
right.
The dominant group could say that you're privileged.
Yeah. And so there's no shortage of role models in that county. No shortage. If someone were growing up, whoever, some other place in the country, there may be some shortage of role models. Now, you would hope that in any school system in the States, there's enough representation that it would be in the curriculum. However, depending on where you are in the school system, the only thing, well, I'm not going to say only, the predominant thing that you're learning is about slavery, the emancipation, and something else, right? You may miss out on learning about people who have been successful and how they've managed in our country, right? And so it also depends on where your school system is, and how I keep using the word pouring into, so how people are pouring into you, right? So if there's touch points where maybe a teacher is pouring in, or a family member or a community or whatever it is, the church, whatever it is, then you're going to be more conscious about your being and see role models that look like you. If there's gaps in any of those pieces, then yeah, you may not see that, and you will see less of how you can achieve, right? I think role modeling is a good thing. I think mentoring is an awesome thing. But again, that mentor doesn't always have to look like you. Right.
As you discovered, would that the mentor that you said that didn't look like you, was that the first time you've had a mentor who didn't look like you?
Not the first time, but for someone to take that much time, 18 months, right? And we would spend probably, it would be just the morning. So we'd go out, visit crews. He would show me the utility industry, how we bring electricity to the houses. And then during outages, he would show me what's going on and how to restore power. So I learned a lot from him, right? And so for someone to pour in, and to this day, I never had a chance to ask him, because he died, why, right? For whatever reason, he saw me. He said, "Hey, what are you doing, young guy?" I said, "I'm sitting here." He said, "I'm going to be here tomorrow to pick you up." And he picked me up, and that was it, right? So I don't know why he was interested. He was, and I'm thankful. Our son was born, and again, I got a lot of role models and adults, and he was one who just said, "Hey, make sure you do this, and this for your son." And other people were saying the same thing, so he didn't say anything unusual. But I recall when his granddaughter was sick, and I have O negative, O positive, universal blood, right? And so she had some blood condition. And before he finished his sentence, I said, "You let me know where I need to go, and I'll donate," right? Because we became close. But I share with some people one thing that did occur. So when he passed, he was in the hospital. And in our family, the men, we tell each other we love each other, right? It's just one of the things we do. Right? And my two boys, I kiss them right here. They'll tell you, Daddy always kissed me on the head, that kind of thing, right? Bob was, his name was Bob, and he was one of the first people who ever said that to me, who wasn't a family member, right? And not only not a family member, it was somebody that didn't look like me. And so he was still in the hospital, and I called him, and he says, "Hey, I'm doing good. I'm going to get out tomorrow. Everything's good." And so we get ready to get off the phone, and he's like, "All right, love you." And I was like, "Oh my goodness, love you too." Click, right? And so I'm glad we had that exchange, but Bob never left. So later that night, Bob had a brain aneurysm and never came home.
Right.
But yeah, there are people that I think he wasn't the first, but he was the first person to spend that much time.
Left an impact, obviously, for you
Yeah.
to, remain in your memory and,
Yeah.
and your being.
Yeah. and all of those kind of experiences shape the way I lead, right? So I want to make sure I get to know people, connect with them, and understand who they are.
Do you love this space, the inclusion and diversity space, what you're doing?
Yeah. It's one of those things. I used to hear the statement, and I was like, this is nonsense. When people would say, when you love what you do, you never work, right? That sounds silly to me, right? This is work. I'm in Australia. This is work. I'm not at home, right? But I will say this. I do truly love what I do. And what's been interesting is that my work is aligned with my volunteer efforts. And so my volunteer efforts are similar too, right? And so the class I teach is about leadership and use of self. And leadership, I have them take different leadership models, and use of self is being more mindful about the energy you bring into a space and what's there long after you left, right? I will say at 50 and finding this work, it is truly fulfilling, right? And being in a situation where my family says, you know what, you need to go do this, is beyond what I could ever explain to anybody else, right? Now, the flip side of that is I don't want to not be home with my wife. I don't want to not be able to see my son when he comes home from school. So that's the struggle. That's the struggle. But the work, I love the work.
Is it challenging though, the work? I don't know what's like in the States. Tell me, is it something that the United States of America, the people embrace diversity and inclusion? I know I've got a few people, sending me messages through LinkedIn asking me, what are you talking about, diversity and inclusive leadership? What does it mean? What does it look like?
Yeah.
Can you practice it?
Yeah. So the work, I say, is a lot. It's exhausting because at the end of the day, I have a couple different trusted advisors, and one is at the school that I teach, and there's this other guy, and we talk about the container, right? And so anytime I do this work, it's about creating and holding the container. So just imagine you and I have a conversation, and I start asking you questions about you. But in order for me to ask those questions about you, I need to be vulnerable. And so this container is holding my vulnerability so that you can step in. That's one-on-one. That's a lot in of itself. So if I'm facilitating a session and there's 20 people, I got 20 different viewpoints. And I can hold, and this is just me, I feel like I can hold any container, except for, this is my only exception, is when hate comes into the space. I'm not built for that. I can't hold hate. I just can't.
So how do you deal with it? If there's somebody in that 20 who says, listen, so skeptical, and just say, look, this is not going to work. This is all about identity politics.
Yeah.
What do you do?
I'm okay with that. That's still not hate.
Oh, not hate? Okay. So
No,
what's
no.
hate?
Hate would be somebody directly saying, I hate you.
Right.
Right. So that means that they wish I never existed.
Right.
So that's the way I define hate.
Okay.
Anything short of that, I got it.
Right.
And for somebody I haven't met a person with the courage to say those words to me face to face. So I've been able to hold these containers so far, right? And I think the body size prevents people from saying that. But so short of that, I'm good. And so I've been able to do that. And at the end of whether it's a 2 hour, it could be a virtual led thing, or it could be a face-to-face thing, whether it's a 4 hour, 8 hour, it's draining because I am very vulnerable. I'm very, open during the sessions. I share a lot about who I am. I bring my family into my discussions. I bring some childhood stuff into the discussions depending on where we go. So it's some work. It's heavy work. It's heavy lifting. It's not light lifting.
But do you find that the work people, obviously, if you talk to a room of people that have been paid by the organization to be there, of course they be forced to listen to you. But if you go out into the crowd and discuss it with, some business people or some people, community members, about the importance of being inclusive and why it's important to have a diverse, leadership team, what's the reception to those kind of content or the kind of conversations that you have outside of the construct of a group?
Yeah. So it depends on the individual, right? And so there's a couple things that I always love about these kind of conversations. So there's two pieces. One, in terms of human beings, if we go to science, 90% of our DNA is exactly the same, right? So we want to focus on the 10% and separate ourselves into tribes or whatever you want to call it.
Or walls.
Is that really what you want to do? Right? So that's one. And then two, if you want to look at the data, diverse organizations outperform all others. They just do on the S&P 500. So if you are really about business and let's say you don't even care about diversity and inclusion, you just want to make money. There's an economic benefit. There's the ROI exceeds all expectations around having diversity of thought, diverse people, bringing them together to solve problems, and using diversity as an asset versus barrier. You can have a bunch of different people, but we don't value them. We want you to assimilate and fall in line. You're still not going to grow. But I want to bring the diversity of thought, background experiences, cultures, all of that into a space. Say, this is how we problem solve. Anywhere in this boundary, you can play. Bring up innovation, bring up new ideas. That group is going to outperform all others, period. So we can have conversations about it. I can give you the facts, and then you can make a choice. You know what? I want to be Polaroid. I want to continue to make this camera that shoots out a piece of paper that's going out of business. Or I want to hear that, oh, there's digital cameras, and this group of people like them. Oh, I am Blockbuster. I don't know if you have Blockbuster here where you go.
Oh, it's died.
right. I'm Blockbuster, and I have an opportunity to get Netflix before there is a Netflix. Right? So we can talk, right? So I don't care who you are in terms of the Harvard-educated CEO or anybody else. We can talk about whether or not this is the purpose of it. I can give you the dollars and cents, as well as why it makes sense from a humanity standpoint. So.
With that topic, we'll go to the Google Manifesto, which is around. My understanding is that Google sacked Jack, the guy who wrote the Google Manifesto, who was assessing the whole subject around diversity. The policy that Google implemented, I think based on gender as well as others, and he went and I read it. I mean, a while back, and from my memory, there were some points great points that he made, whereby he felt that, say, when it came to the gender quota, that by having that gender quota, it gave the role to a woman regardless of whether or not she was capable, and the lack of women in STEM in the first place meant that there were less women in that space. Okay. So he from my perspective, he should have the right to express that. But it was interesting how it kind of exploded, and it, of course, he's lost his job and around that whole diversity inclusion piece. Yeah. What's you? I can see you're saying, okay, I'm waiting for you to finish, and I will give you my piece. So I kind of.
No. Really, so this is one of the things, and I talk about it when I'm doing my work. How can we be present to hear? So I really wasn't waiting to talk, but I was listening to you, and I was really trying to hear your perspective, right? And so you said, I don't even remember the guy's name, but the fact that he got sacked, and then he talked a little about gender quotas, and your perspective is he should have the ability to speak.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I agree. There are certain things. So I'm a comment. I'm a comment on a couple things, right? So the first one is, should he have the right to speak? Absolutely. Absolutely. If we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, I want to be able to hear voices. I want to hear the voice of the people that work for me. There are a couple things that if I had a conversation with him, that I would want to go down through his letter, and I've read it. Not that I digest every piece of it, but I would want to go through and I would pause with him and say, where did you learn that? Where did you learn that is a truth? And is it the only truth? Right? Because there's elements of that. So there's one piece in there that he talked about not wanting to show empathy. That empathy was a bad thing. Right. So I got problems with that. As a human being, I got problems with that because all of us have emotion. And if I want to say that in a corporate environment that we should not show empathy towards another human being, that's problematic. That I don't want to connect with the emotion that you're feeling when we're based out of emotions, that's a problem for me. That's my truth. It doesn't mean it's the truth with a capital T, but it's part of my truth, right? And then in terms of gender, in the whole dialogue, there's a whole bunch that he says about gender.
There's quite a few,
right?
Yeah.
I'll just say this on a whole. For any for anyone in a dominant culture to believe that the dominant culture doesn't have an upper hand to those less subcultures, again, is problematic. My last 5 weeks of travel have been unreal, and been in probably 6 different cultures, 3 or 4 different continents, a lot of different countries, right? And the dominant culture changed as I was traveling. And even as I watched the news and media, things changed. Where for a dominant culture, I may not even be conscious that I can walk into the grocery store, pick up a few items and walk out, pay and just walk out. Where someone else who's not from the dominant culture will walk in and just because I may not be familiar with the setup and layout, I ask a question, I may automatically, and nobody's doing it intentionally, but just get a nasty kind of response back. Like, you don't know? How come you don't know where to find that? They don't say that, but that's the way I feel, right? That translates into just a simple interaction like that now, once we are in a corporate environment, the dominant culture knows the language and how to play the game, right? So there was a statement in there around why women aren't in STEM. Okay, so let's go back to let's switch dominant culture to gender. 66% of 4th grade girls are interested in STEM. 66%. 18% apply to go to college. Why? Maybe because even in some households, when these young girls, these 16-year-old girls who want to tinker, who want to grab the hammer and nail, who want to take more science classes, are steered away from it by their own parents.
Yep.
You know what? Put that hammer down. Why are you doing that? So that by the time we have these 14-year-olds now going into college, 66% now is 18%. So someone who wrote the manifesto, if they don't think we need to do more work in STEM, may not be conscious about our own culture, even in our own sacred places of our own households. So if it happens in someone's household, trust me, it's happening on a broader scale of the culture. No one is going to, most people are not going to tell a young boy to put the hammer down. Most people are not going to tell a young boy, get out of that truck and stop looking at the engine, right? Why are you playing with that science project? We have someone in our house, not in our household, but in our family. This young girl was brilliant from childhood. She just left. They moved. Her stuff is all about science, technology, and engineering. We already know that she's gonna change the world, right? When we buy her Christmas gifts, originally it was Legos. Now we're trying to get more complex stuff because the Legos are too easy, right?
But she was obviously she's got the support of the family.
Absolutely.
But so therefore, I think in terms of say for STEM, I know that in Australia we've had this huge drive now to increase girls in STEM, but it feels like sometimes as an outsider reading it and observing the whole discourse around STEM, girls in STEM, is that they're talking about the system not allowing for it. Maybe to some extent it hasn't, but a larger extent is as you pointed out, and I think it's got to do with the family environment, whereby they're not encouraging kids or young girls to go into STEM. So, it's a challenging thing, isn't it? Because how do you balance that up to encourage the family in order for the numbers to rise? Otherwise, there are no numbers there to make it happen at that level.
Right. And so I think part of it is some conversation and education with families, right? But also, let's go back to Google, right? And so if Google wants to leverage the women that are in the organization to mentor other women, it's the right thing to do. If Google wants to leverage the maker movement and have maker fairs on their property that's geared towards people who are typically marginalized, it's the right thing to do. Now, I don't, and in that little thing, it said something, I don't want to say little thing, but in this gentleman's letter, there's this conversation around it's exclusionary. Actually, most of those programs, if you really look at them, are not. They don't say it's only women, it's targeted towards. If a young boy wants to apply or a man wants to apply, I can tell you every affinity group that I was part of was the African American whatever. Anybody could join. White male could join. White woman could join. Anybody. Any background could join. But it is about this particular affinity group. So that was something else. And I don't know Google's policy, but I would be highly surprised that you only, you can only be X to join that group.
I suppose there is that thinking that if you form a particular group, African American or Asian American, while it's not exclusionary, the terminology, the identification in Australia is called identity politics, in itself is exclusionary. That's the debate. And I agree with you. It doesn't mean it is excluding, but somehow unconsciously or consciously, the dominant group, if you can, feel that it is more of an exclusionary action behavior if we do identify it a certain way.
And I'll buy that. The challenge is for anyone who feels that way is to confirm, is that true? Don't sit in that space to think it is. Let me go ask, can I join? Yes, you can join. Oh, okay.
But what could we, the minority group, do to make it more inclusive of the majority or the dominant group?
So, that's a beautiful question. So I would say this, one of two things. I'll share with you that every organization that I was part of, every corporation that I was part of, that I was some member of their affinity group, our business cases were public. Anybody could read it. Our actions are and then our what we were gonna. So our goals were public, and they're published through the corporation. You choose to go to the website. I think part of it is we could, not necessarily the affinity group, but the corporation could make sure that people know that, hey, these are the different affinity groups. This is their business case. This is what the benefit for the business. And just tell them. Anybody can join if you choose to. So if you see something in this business case that appeals to you, it's a welcoming for anybody of any background. You touched on something that I think is a healthy conversation. That is taking me on my own personal journey, and it's around the dominant group, and it's this thing about fear. So if I'm in a dominant group, and now I may be told that there's too many of me. Wow, I'm going to feel some kind of way. And then I also see that all these subgroups are forming stuff and they're creating business cases and, about why there should be more. And now I actually have data that says the more diverse organizations outperform. But I'm in the dominant group. Trust me, there's this feeling of threat. There's this feeling of fear. It doesn't mean that the truth, this becomes a capital T, that more diverse don't outperform. The true discussion may not even be with the groups that have been that are less than, for lack of a better word. The real discussion is with the dominant group, that person having your own discussion around fear and anxiety and the unknown, your own conversation. I haven't met anybody who has run into fear. But I do believe, and this is Bart Bailey, I don't have any data, any science, but just my personal belief is that all human beings have the ability to manage and handle fear. All human beings have the ability to manage and deal with the unknown. But most will run from it.
Fight or flee
Fight,
syndrome.
Fight or flee, right? And it's actually fight, flight, or freeze. And most of us run into that fight or flight. Oh my goodness, it's the unknown. All these people are coming. And if you look at the data in 2060, there will be more, just population-wise, APAC and Nigeria, there will be more people coming out of those areas than any place else, just based on birth rates. So the numbers are going to grow. And if I haven't dealt with my own stuff, then I'm going to probably, depending on who I am, I may go into this fight mode. Let me fight to hold on to everything I got. I wish we were back to when it was great before. I don't know, easy with that one. But I want to hold on to what I have. Versus, let me open my arms and see what the humanity is in this person, because the world is changing. And if I still want to make money, I still want to have relevance, how do I connect with people that are different than me? And most of us want to be in our own tribes. When the truth about humanity is I need to be able to connect with people that are different than me. And especially if you want to tie dollars to it, there's an economic reason to do so. And so I would say for those that are in dominant positions wherever we're talking about in the country or the world, to just be mindful about the world is changing. There's nothing that is stagnant. The world is not staying the same. The world, the sun comes up, it goes down. There's constant change. And we got to change with it. So,
what's your last question? What would you hope to achieve by the time you're 60? Then you're in the you're just in your young years now. In 10 years time, what do you hope to achieve on this journey?
Yeah. So, twofold. Actually, there's a couple pieces. I would say between now and 60, I got to go to the number one priority. Me and my wife have found a spot where we're going to live and retire.
Oh, where's that?
We haven't decided yet, but we know we want to be near some water,
Okay.
right? So that's number one. Number two, I think that I've done the work to the point where people understand that the journey that I'm on is about inclusion, right? And it's evident in my being without me having to use my words. If at 60, I can walk into a room, and if somebody wants to look at my LinkedIn or my Facebook or whatever they want to look at, they're like, oh my goodness, look at this dude. I thought he was this, but he's actually this. And I can tell that he's been on a journey and he's growing. And that it just shows up in my spirit. Maybe they don't need to look at LinkedIn or Facebook, but there's something about my being that they're like, there's something different about this guy. That's what I hope at 60. And then in addition to just that it doesn't just show up in my spirit and my being, but when I start to talk and people will say, you know, I remember going to a session when he was 50 and 49, and this is where I'm at now because I've stayed in touch with him and he's continued to challenge me and I continue to challenge him, and we've grown. That I don't have to speak about it anymore, that more people are talking about the experience and can share my journey and I can share theirs, and that you start to see that some of the organizations that I've been at are starting to go towards the economic benefit of it, but not just because of the dollars and cents, because the people are now talking about how do I connect better from a human being standpoint. That the 90% that our DNA is the same is more important than the 10% difference. That tribalism is less important to me than me wanting to be in my own tribe, that I want to connect with people that are different than me, because the experiences as we travel to Australia and now we're down here, me and my wife are like, man, this is nice down here. We want to get to know more people, right? So that we come back that, yeah, we'll do the normal tourist stuff, but I want somebody to say, hey, come to my house, right?
Yep.
That's where I want to be in 60 years. That's it.
Well, you did come to my place.
I did.
Didn't stay long enough.
So check, got one.
Didn't stay long enough. Next time I'll make you a Vietnamese dinner.
All right.
Look, it's I'm sure we can sit here and talk much more longer.
Yeah.
But I hope that you can come back again to Sydney.
Yeah.
And we'll have another conversation, and
Yeah.
we'll see where your work is.
Yeah.
So with what you do, I mean, obviously, you obviously mentor and coach people as well.
Yeah.
And you do that virtually as well?
Yeah, so we do some coaching, definitely. We've been doing it virtually. We actually designing this 6-month cohort where there's some elements of in-person, but there's this virtual piece. There's some reading associated with it, and then there's going to be this ability to have dialogue around the readings, so some questions and through the month. So yeah, we do virtual coaching as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give us the website, and we'll have it on the website so that people want to get in touch. Okay. So what we'll do now, obviously after the conversation, we'll splice it up and then we'll share it across our social media, and you'll be tagged in.
All right.
So thank you so much, Bart.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So that's it from us. That is from us from Dawncast Podcast. Until next time, in the meantime, please click the link below and subscribe and follow us on this journey. Well, did you enjoy that episode of Dawncast? Well, I hope you did. At Dawn, the difference is you. So hit the subscribe button below and leave a comment and tell us what you would like to hear more of in the future.